Welcome to Pilates is the Answer podcast, where you can discover the power of Pilates and how it can improve every aspect of your life. We are your hosts, Stacey Jernigan
and Pearl Dahmen, and we look forward to introducing and sharing all of the questions about which Pilates is the answer.
Welcome back, Pilates is the Answer family. Today we have another guest that we are interviewing. So Pearl, I want to first just talk with you for a second about my interview with Tabitha. Did you have a chance to listen to it yet?
Yes, I did. You never think about all the things that people are dealing with in life. And there are so many different challenges. Each one of us has something just a little different. And it is very exciting to find that although we all have different challenges, Pilates can give us all something to help us through that challenge. Tabitha's interview was great. Let's tell the listeners a little more about Tabitha before your interview starts.
So I met Tabitha. When I moved to Florida, about a year and a half ago. She was one of the first people that I met, and I just fell in love with her right away. She's so sweet, and it was cool because we had a lot in common in terms of her being a Pilates instructor, of course. And then she also is in the insurance industry, which my son's dad is as well. So we kind of had that in common. She just became such a close friend from the start. So the more I got to know her, the more I realized what a great instructor she was. And I was just so fascinated about the strengths that I see in her as a Pilates instructor. And as she mentions in the video, you'll hear that she struggles with imposter syndrome and struggles with, having that confidence in herself. And I just love how real she is, how honest she is, how willing she is to be vulnerable, because that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, was because sometimes we do have those struggles, and a lot of times our clients don't know, or our family members and friends don't know the things that we're struggling with. And so I just love that transparency that she has, and that my other friend that I interviewed, Julie Turner, has as well. And so I'm just excited, and Tabitha has really encouraged me to do the podcast, because I was just nervous about starting it. And so I love that, it's kind of come to fruition, thankfully to you. And now it's really cool to have her on as a guest.
That's terrific. Well, what I really like is that through this podcast, some of us can really reach out and connect on those things that we're not able to necessarily share and get support for. So learning about other people's challenges in life, whether they be like the imposter syndrome or actually a physical challenge, knowing there's other people out there, that I like to say, you're not the Lone Ranger, really helps it make it a little easier. So with that being said, let's let our listeners listen to your interview.
Okay, great. I am so excited today to introduce you to one of my favorite humans on the planet. She is also a fellow Pilates enthusiast, fellow Pilates instructor, wonderful mom, wonderful wife. She's also a public insurance adjuster. She plays many roles, wears many hats, and is also, I'm very honored to call her one of my dearest, closest friends. So I will let you also introduce yourself. This is Miss Tabitha Byers.
I think the world of you too. I'm so thankful when our paths crossed, when you moved from Alabama to Florida, to see what life had in store for you. And I'm glad I was part of that present that you got whenever you moved here. And just very thankful to have you in my life.
Aw, I love that. Thank you. So I'm so excited. You are my first guest that I'm interviewing for this podcast, and you have played a really big role in me doing the podcast. You have really encouraged me and inspired me to do this. So I'm really excited to have you on today. And I just want to start by talking about how did you discover Pilates? What brought you to Pilates?
Well, I had moved to Jacksonville in 2007, and my first job was at a women's only gym. And we had a Pilates instructor who spent a lot of time sitting along the wall. We had purchased, or the owner of the gym had purchased, and I didn't know anything about Pilates at that point. So we had this big old contraption in the corner. They called it a Cadillac. And every time a woman would purchase one of our memberships, they got a free demo on the Cadillac. Well, sometimes, because it can be an intimidating piece of equipment, the women would decide that they didn't want their free demo. So our Pilates instructors spent a lot of time, like I said, sitting on the wall, passing time. And I said, hey, I'll do it. Let's play around. So she had me doing jump board, doing inversions, doing catwalk. Of course, at the time, I didn't know that was the terminology, but I loved it. And it wasn't until Club Pilates came along that I was really able to do Pilates to the degree that I wanted to, because prior to Club Pilates, it really was an exercise for people who had money. Had lots of money. Right. And I wasn't one of those people. So Club Pilates did provide me an opportunity that I probably would not have been able to have otherwise.
Okay. So how long ago did you become a member at Club Pilates?
I was a member at a boutique studio back in 2018. That's really when I started practicing again. I saw a picture of myself from behind and was mortified that I didn't know the terminology then, but I was looking kyphotic in this picture. Okay. And so I decided that I needed to do something out to a boutique studio here. And again, I was only able to afford like one session a week. And then I found out about Club Pilates was in, I think, 2019, August of 2019. And they told me how much it was to be an unlimited member. I immediately signed up, paid for 3 months right out of the gate. And after a couple of months of paying for that membership, after the 3 months lapsed, I did the calculations and thought, well, I can continue to pay for a membership, or I can learn how to do this myself. And that was what was the catalyst to participating in teacher training.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did not realize that. So how long have you been teaching then?
So I signed up for teacher training on 1/1/1/2020. I chose that date on. I like all the ones. And so our teacher training started in March of 2020. So guess what else was March of 2020? COVID. Mm-hmm. So we did our mat workshop that day, or that March, that first, I think it was around March 20th. And then shortly thereafter, the studios got shut down. So we were that teacher training group that had to learn how to teach 6 feet apart, which is interesting.
Big challenge.
It was a bit of a challenge for sure, but we got through it. And I started my apprenticeship in October of 2020, and I've been teaching ever since.
Okay. So I would love to know, what was your favorite thing about going through the teacher training program?
I really enjoyed meeting others who are like-minded. Mm-hmm. And I would say my favorite part of training was Cadillac training. Because, I mean, who doesn't like to invert themselves and hang off the side of the Cadillac? That's always a lot of fun.
Yes, and that's where it all started for you.
Exactly, yes. And I have one in my house, too. I purchased a Peak Pilates Cadillac. I have a chair here. I have an inversion table. I basically have a studio in my house now.
You have a full setup. That's so cool. Well, I'm curious.
I have a full setup.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what was, or what has been, your biggest challenge in terms of being an instructor.
I struggle with imposter syndrome.
Really?
I feel like I don't. Yes. Yeah. I feel like sometimes I don't know as I do. I don't give myself enough credit. And I am hard on myself. And so I would say that's probably the biggest challenge that I have. And then I'm not one of these people that doesn't want to just do it. I want to understand it. Mm-hmm. So, and not just knowing anatomy, but understanding the principles of movement and the principles of anatomy. I do wish I was more versed in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's common for sure, because that's one of the biggest challenges to learn, especially if you were learning it during COVID. So you didn't get to have a lot of hands-on experience of feeling the muscles contracting in the body, and then we're wearing masks and the social distancing. So I'm sure that was a big challenge. In our conversations, I feel like you're very knowledgeable.
Well, that's why I say I'm hard on myself.
Yes, I
do probably know more than I give myself credit for.
Yes.
But yeah, that's probably that. And yet another thing that I struggle with is putting my classes together. You know, I struggle with making sure that there's a good flow, that it's challenging enough. You know, because you have some people in your classes where Red Spring will do it. And then, you know, you've got some that maybe you should hybrid. Maybe you should red and blue. But if I'm cueing, okay, if you're new, go red. If you've been doing it for a little bit, go hybrid. You've been here for a while, go red and blue. Like, that gets really exhausting. I think that probably a misconception that being is easy. It is not easy. I thought that myself as a member, you know, that, oh, well, this is simple. There's nothing to it. And then when you actually get to start, you know, or you start doing it, you're like, oh, it is a lot more involved than you realize. So I do struggle. I think that's one of my biggest things is putting the flows together.
Well, and I think teaching in a big group setting, especially, because at Club Pilates, there's 12, right? So 12 reformers. So there's usually 12 clients there. That's a lot. That's a lot of people to teach at once on equipment. And it's difficult because you have people who, you know, are oftentimes coming for the time and not necessarily for the specific class level. So sometimes you'll get a mixed level of people. And then sometimes you'll have somebody with maybe certain conditions in their body or, you know, just different misalignments that they maybe don't really know that much about how to correct, or don't really, you know, have the body awareness, especially when, you know, like during footwork, for example, a lot of people will say, well, I can't see my feet. I don't know what my feet are doing, you know, and we don't often exercise barefoot, I guess, unless you're doing like yoga, you know, or some other modality of exercise like that. But it is hard to notice and develop that awareness in your feet and think about what your feet are doing, what your ankles are doing. And it's very difficult. And so, you know, as an instructor teaching 12 people at a time, you know, it's hard to see 24 feet at once. And then hard, like you're saying, to make sure, and then to make sure that someone who does need maybe a little bit of a lighter spring setting or some type of modification versus someone who's very advanced and very able-bodied, and then sort of everyone in between, you know, it can become difficult to accommodate for. So I can definitely understand that would be a challenge.
For sure. And also, everyone's at their own place in their journey, right? So they may not, and I, just from my own practice, if I'm telling you, your feet, you're going in a supination, and your feet, you're not pushing through the middle of those heels. If you don't have that awareness yet, I can cue it all day long, but until you've had that mind-body moment where it clicks, sometimes the words just go right in one ear and out the other. I mean, you don't give up on them, but you do have a class to teach with 12 people. You try to get, and if it doesn't click, just keep moving. Just keep doing it, you know. I also was, you know, just recently diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos, and part of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which after 20 years of trying to get answers, it was actually a Pilates instructor and a Pilates student that told me about the condition. But part of Ehlers-Danlos is you struggle with your proprioception. So even myself, I have my own issues with, you know, how am I supposed to feel in this moment? And sometimes, again, that imposter syndrome, or I also call like a perfection paralysis. Don't let perfection paralysis keep you from doing what works best for you where you are in your journey.
I like that. Yeah, and I want to go back to talking more about your diagnosis in a minute, but I want to just wrap up talking about, teaching in a large group, and it's challenging. I know yesterday I was actually working with somebody one-on-one, and she was, what I was having her do, I wanted her feet to be perfectly parallel, and one of her feet was just slightly externally rotating, and so I corrected it for her, and she said, "Oh no, now it feels like I'm turning inward, And she said, "Are you sure?" And and I kept, my hands on her feet so she could feel where my hands were, and pressing them down into the foot bar to start to, create that feedback that helps with increasing proprioception. But that's one of the hard things, is that sometimes even if you are trying to correct it, it's hard to know, whether or not you're doing it well. So it is interesting. I think it's always challenging. And like you said, as a Pilates instructor, it can be, draining, and it can be hard, to make sure you're cueing everything you're supposed to and giving modifications as you need to. And it's funny because the people that know that I'm a Pilates instructor, but don't know me very well, or don't know, the Pilates world very well, especially teaching equipment classes, teaching reformer and Cadillac and chair. They say, "Wow, that's so cool. You just do Pilates all day long." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I never do Pilates. I'm just standing there telling everyone else what to do." So it's kind of funny because, it is tough, and to that point, it's hard because you're not relying, like in some modalities of exercise, with my background anyway, teaching boot camp, like I'm doing it with them so they can see what I'm doing in addition to what I'm cueing verbally. And it's so hard because in a lot of, and sometimes in mat classes, you're doing, you're demoing and doing the exercises with them, but typically you're not, especially in the equipment classes, so that you are being able to tactile cue them and make corrections and all of that to check form. But yeah, so it's hard because, people don't always understand what you mean, or they don't know how to correct it. So it can become really challenging. But so I want to go back to your diagnosis and ask you, do you think that Pilates can help with that?
Absolutely. I think that I have to be gentle with myself. And I do think that this is what makes me a good instructor, is because I have my own issues. So I empathize with clients.
Yeah.
When they tell me, my hip hurts, my back hurts, I get it, and I believe less is more in Pilates, right? I mean, there's a lot of cool choreography out there, but I usually just stick very closely to what I was taught as far as just your regular, by the book exercises. And I hear it over and over: great class, great class, great class. Like, I don't think that you have to make it, you don't have to make it so complex that you lose what you're there for, which is the benefit of that mind-body connection and strengthening those deep, stable muscles. So for me, absolutely, I do believe that it can help me. I think that I just have to learn that I can't do as much as I would like to do. I tell my students, my members in class all the time, I would rather take a level 1 class before a 1.5 or a 2 or a 2.5. And if you're not in Club Pilates world, I know this isn't making sense, but I would much rather stick to that foundational beginner type workout. But I do believe that it can help me. I just have to adjust my own expectations of myself.
That makes sense. Well, I know that we are going to wrap up shortly. So I want to ask you, can we invite you back on later? Like maybe in a few weeks or a few months, and follow up and ask about your journey and how it's going, everything that you've learned about Ehlers-Danlos, and how how your therapy is going, how you think Pilates is helping. But before we wrap up, I have 2 more questions. So I want to know, what is your least favorite Pilates exercise?
Let's see. On a mat, you can keep your open rocker. on it. And I do not like doing teasers on the box facing away from the straps. I'm just not a fan. I don't know if it's because of my upper body strength own issues, but I don't really care to do that. But I think those were probably my two least favorite things.
I would have to agree with the teaser for sure. Funny enough, I actually really like open leg rocker, but not a fan of teaser. And it's so hard because I think with that being such a foundational exercise, it's an important one, but especially the variation that you're mentioning on the box, on the reformer with the straps, it is really tough. And so in order for people to try to execute the exercise, they'll end up recruiting parts of the body that we don't want them to. And so, especially like you're mentioning, if you teach that in a group class, it's really hard to ensure that that's not happening. So it's really interesting. But yeah, people oftentimes will laugh at me and say, how can you be a Pilates instructor and not like teaser, or not teach teaser very often? But so I have to agree with you on that one. So fun. So fun fact, just before we go, what I want to hear, just in life in general, like favorite vacation you've ever taken, favorite place you've ever visited.
Oh goodness. Favorite place I've ever visited. Oh my goodness. I would say Amsterdam and London pre 9/11.
Okay.
Because travel before was so different. It was so different. And I was in college and it was European and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm going to have to go with that.
Okay. I've never been to either of those. Maybe this should be on my bucket list. I love it.
For sure.
It is so awesome to get to talk with you, and I really want you to come back on soon.
Yes, for sure. No, thank you so much for having me. I know we've talked about this for months, and it's really cool to see it come to fruition. And, I wish you all the best always in everything that you do. You're really a special person.
Thank you. I feel the same about you. All right. Well, we will see you next episode. Pilates is the answer, family. Bye for now.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for tuning in. For more information, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Pilates is the Answer and on the web at pilatesistheanswer.com.
Feel free to message us with questions for which you are searching the answer. We would love for you to follow our podcast, leave a kind review, and lots of stars.